I think we're a go. We can get started.
Good evening to one and all present here. My name is Inika Khosla, and I'm from the cohort of 2023.
And my name is Mahika Nair, and I'm also from the cohort of 2023.
Dear cohort of 2023 and 2024, we're excited to welcome you and your families to the inaugural ceremony of our orientation week. Our team is looking forward to an exciting, enriching, and interactive week with you, and we've been working for weeks towards this moment.
Today's formal inaugural ceremony will include notes of welcome by our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Rangarajan, Dean of IFMR Graduate School of Business, Dr. Shobha Das, and the Divisional Chair of Literature and Arts at the School of Interwoven Arts and Sciences, Dr. Akila Narayan. This will be followed by the much anticipated keynote address by a special guest for today, Dr. Tara Tyagarajan. We commence the formal proceedings of this evening by the VC's address. Dr. Rangarajan is a historian of modern and contemporary India with a special interest in environmental history. A Rhodes Scholar, he received his MA and PhD both from Oxford University. He has taught at Delhi University, National Center for Biological Sciences, and at Jabalpur University. He has served as the director of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. His first book was Fencing the Forest, Oxford University Press 1996, and the most recent Nature and Nation, Permanent Black 2015. His edited works include the Oxford Anthology of Indian Wildlife and Environmental Issues in India. He has co-edited many works, including most recently At Nature's Edge, Oxford University Press 2018. Dr. Rangarajan. Sir, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Inika and Mahika. I first want to welcome our chief guest, Dr. Tyagarajan, and also acknowledge presence of two distinguished scholars, Dean Shobha Das from the IFMR Graduate School of Business and chairperson of the Division of Literature and the Arts, Dr. Akila Narayan. Distinguished friends, the incoming cohort, and parents and well-wishers. It's a privilege for me to be here today. I did find something I have in common with all those who are at a Kriya initiation for the first time. This, I believe, will be your first initiation. There won't be another, but it's also my first initiation because I'm still in my fourth, I think, just beginning the 5th week as Vice Chancellor. It's a privilege to be at Kriya, and it's an even greater privilege to be here on this day of 9th August 2021, welcoming all of you. The 9th of August, of course, is a very important day in the history of India, South Asia, and Asia, because it was on 9th August 1942 that the Quit India movement was launched. My distinguished young friend Inika Khosla is joining us from the city of Mumbai, till recently known as Bombay. So when Mumbai was still Bombay, in the a Maidan, quite appropriately now called the August Kranti Maidan, the Maidan of the August Revolution, Mahatma Gandhi gave the famous call of do or die. I want to emphasize this because that was an epochal event. We know that the Quit India movement did not quite succeed. The British stayed on in India for 5 long years. But it was still a very important movement because at the end of a year, it became very clear that without using brute force, British rule could not continue in India. And the war sapped British strength. And by 1945, it was clear that the empire was on its way out. I think we are living through similar, very epochal times in August 2021. I'm very struck by the fact that we are all meeting today through the technology of Zoom, enabled, of course, by the World Wide Web of the Internet. I know there are many young friends who do not believe that the world really existed before the Internet, but believe me, it did, and it wasn't quite so long ago. But it's important that we are meeting via the Internet, partly because of the conditions of a global pandemic, which we know originated perhaps in the Chinese city of Wuhan, but has reminded us that no matter where we live on the planet, we are at last count told 7.7 billion people on the planet. That's 7 followed by lots and lots of zeros. Wherever you live, we are unified, not only by the biology of the pandemic, but by the fact that we live in an interconnected world. I was looking at figures of plane travel, and it did surprise me to know that until March last year, on any day, wherever you were on Earth, over 1 billion people were stepping onto or off a plane. So I think there's something very important about the world of 2021. That is, we are living through epochal changes. The world is even more interconnected than it was in that August morning of 1942. It is in some senses more prosperous than it was at that time. The years since 1945 have seen an enormous transformation in terms of global wealth creation. We see it most clearly in a country such as India. When India became independent, barely 12% of the population was literate. Today, the literacy figures are way over 70 or 75%. Similarly, the lifespan of a young Indian male was likely to be 32. For women, it was even less. Today, we're looking at figures in the late 60s. But despite this, I'm sure you'd all agree with me, the epochal changes we're living through have made us aware of two things. First, that the world that is interdependent is also fragile. The pandemic brings home fragility in the sense of the loss of loved ones, of fevers and ailments that we did not know could afflict us, and their after effects, which I'm sure will linger for long. But we're also living through other epochal changes. Our own city, Sri City, is in a very beautiful part of coastal Andhra Pradesh. It's not far from the sea. And if you look at the IPCC report, and I believe there was one released just about 2 hours before our meeting. I'm sure our meeting is historic for us, but that report is perhaps even more historic for humanity. And reports such as this one and the earlier ones indicate that if global warming were to continue at the rate we are presently seeing, perhaps by 2100, this place where I'm meeting you, maybe we can debate under 10 or 15 feet of water. I'm sure that may even be true of where Dr. Tara Tyagarajan is sitting in the United States, or the young Enika Khosla on the west coast of India. These epochal changes, interdependence and fragility, therefore make it even more important that we prepare ourselves for this world. There are many ways of preparing yourself for change, and one of them is to being educated to be able to face up to it. And one of the remarkable things about India, of course, is that it has been at the forefront of a great educational transformation, particularly over the last 30 years. The number of Indians who go to college has doubled from some 13% to 26%. We are told in the next 10 to 15 years, it will go up to almost 50%. What is so special then about Kriya, other than that it's a new university? And we will be welcoming even more students this year than last year. I think what is new about us is quality. And I don't mean only the quality of our faculty who are excellent, the quality of our libraries, our laboratories, our facilities, our ability to teach people, not just young people, not just the arts, the natural sciences, the humanities, social sciences, but also look at knowledge in an integrated way. And I want to emphasize, not only because Dr. Akila Narayan, who's with us, is not only chairperson of the division, and I'm sure she won't be embarrassed. She's done something none of the 96 odd faculty here have managed to do in its 2 years plus of existence. She's actually released a disc, Akila and the Alchemists. You can look it up. But I want to emphasize that in Kriya, we look at knowledge as an interconnected whole. So the very notion of interwoven arts and sciences is not just interwoven as an advertisement. It's as an attitude, if you like, a frame of mind, a belief that knowledge is holistic, that in the 21st century, one needs to have a sense of the natural sciences, of its enormous discoveries, not only of power and promise, but also of the perils that technology may hold, of the humanities and social sciences, because if we live in a world that is diverse, one has to look at changing human aspirations and at the reality that coexistence, much as we celebrate it, is easier to celebrate than to work out in a just and peaceful manner. Not only with people who look different from us, pray differently from us, come from different faiths, cultures, or speak different languages, but also with the myriad species that share this planet with us. And I want to emphasize here that the humanistic sciences and the natural sciences would be incomplete without the sense of the arts. There's an ancient Sanskrit couplet, and my Sanskrit is poor, so I will not try to inflict it on you, which says that a man, and I'm sure they meant women as well, in those days they were not very gender sensitive, were they? They said a man who has no knowledge of music, art, and literature is like a beast without horns, a head, or a tail. So that's not what we're attempting at Kriya. We are attempting a more holistic sense of appreciation of interwoven nature of knowledge. One of the questions I'm always asked is, that's all very well, Professor. A young person will come into Kriya, she'll learn about all these wonderful interwoven arts and sciences. What then? And the answer, of course, is, as senior cohorts would tell you, that there is here adequate and more than excellent facility to learn whatever discipline you want, whether it's computer science, philosophy, or mathematics, along with learning a minor or a concentration. And if you are keen on it, we do think it's important that you do a capstone thesis and write a little piece of work which is all your own. So we believe that Kriya in its own way would prepare you for the wider world. We have two more advantages which I want to highlight, which is the IFMR Graduate School of Business, which has a long distinguished history, a history which Kriya would like to embrace as its own. It's a pre-history of our university before the idea and the concept of university were born. We have people from managerial practices and professions. And we also have centers, very important centers which work on policy, which work on different ways of applying knowledge to the real and the conceptual. So Kriya attempts to address the problems of the modern world in what we think is a very good way, by having researcher, practitioner, scholars who not just teach, they teach very well in all Indian universities. We salute all of them, we respect them, but we do think that we are trying to be at the cutting edge, not just about how knowledge is conceived, but also how it's imparted. In attempting not to teach young people what to think, because nobody should do that, but how to think, in not what their objective should be, but whether that objective can be attained in a manner that is both ethical and intellectually elegant and holistic. This is a small effort. We realize Kriya is all of it together, 40 acres. We have a new 100-acre campus plan. We have 850 students. We'll have 2,000 in 5 years. It looks, believe me, when you look at the vastness of India, like a drop in the ocean. But I'll end with a famous saying of a Sufi poet who famously said that it's easy to curse the darkness 1,000 times, but it's much more important to light a lamp. And the Sanskrit word Kriya, of course, celebrates both practice and effort. That's what we're engaged in. And our effort is meaningful because of all of you, the students who come to carry forward that flame and take it into the future. And it's our privilege to welcome you today in the company of my very distinguished friends. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rangarajan, for that wonderful insight and that really warm welcome to our incoming cohort. The journey of every SIAS student is shared with our student colleagues from IFMR Graduate School of Business as we co-create an enjoyable student experience. We cordially invite Dr. Shobha Das, who is the Dean of our Graduate School of Business, to share her warm welcome. Dr. Shobha Das holds a PhD degree from Carlson School of Management, University of Minnesota, a postgraduate diploma in management from IIM Calcutta, a BA Honours in Economics from Lady Shri Ram College, Delhi University. Trained in the case method at the Harvard Business School, Dr. Shobha teaches undergraduate, master's, doctoral, and executive business and organization theory. She is taught at the Nanyang Business School of NTU, Singapore, and at Qatar University. She's pioneered the use of simulation software in teaching strategic management in both of these universities. We welcome you, Dr. Shobha Das.
Thank you. Following Professor Mahesh is a hard act to follow. He's an amazing historian and the scope of his knowledge is vast. I will try to share with you the history of IFMR GSB and bring into context the COVID pandemic. Just formally, good evening to everyone. Special greetings to the third cohort of the School of Interwoven Arts and Sciences, Kriya University. Kriya University was set up in 2018. IFMR Society is the sponsoring body of this university. Today, Kriya has 3 types of entities, as Professor Mahesh was saying: the research centers, SIAS, where you all will be studying, and the IFMR Graduate School of Business that I manage. Kriya University's mission is to prepare humanity for an unpredictable world. To deal with unpredictability, an organization or even a person needs to be resilient, strong enough when things change, build experience dealing with change, and survive and succeed with change. For the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about IFMR GSB and how it has built its resilience through handling change. And then I want to turn to you and suggest some ways that you can build your resilience to deal with unpredictable things that are likely to happen in our lifetimes. As for IFMR, if ever there has been an institution that has faced change, this is it. I will talk about a few changes that IFMR has dealt with in its history. And like I said, I will then talk about the COVID-19 pandemic and how we experienced it and dealt with it. So IFMR began in 1970 in Chennai. It was founded by ICICI, the House of Kotharis, and a few other major industrial groups. For 30 years, it grew really rapidly from a small scale to a large scale research and training institution. How do we know it did well? Well, throughout this 30-year growth, it maintained its reputation as an excellent place for research and training. Then the institution decided to do three things to change its scope of operations. First, it offered a PhD program in 1988 in affiliation with the University of Madras. Next, it leveraged on its expertise in finance and economics and started a business school. And then it decided it would go into a full-fledged business school that offered all the disciplines of business. How do we know it did this changes in scope? Well, today in India, of the more than 5,000 business schools, we are in the top 1%. So I think we have done a reasonable job in managing the changes in scope. A third way that change affected IFMR was a physical change in location. When expansion plans happened, the location in central Chennai was not enough, and we moved to Sri City, Andhra Pradesh, the current campus. This physical change took some time to happen. And finally, in 2016, the first MBA batch graduated from this campus. And then finally, there were two big structural changes that IFMR has gone through. When it moved from Chennai to Sri City, it changed from IFMR to IFMR University. That was a private state university in Andhra Pradesh. The next, and probably the most recent big structural change that IFMR has faced is when the founders of Kriya met with IFMR leaders and decided to merge. So Kriya University was set up in 2018, sponsored by IFMR Society, and the IFMR B School became part of Kriya University and was named the IFMR Graduate School of Business. In 2019, the first set of postgraduates with the Kriya University degree were the IFMR GSB MBAs. With all these changes under its belt, when the COVID-19 pandemic came, the resilience of this institution showed. Kriya University management realized the magnitude and severity of the pandemic and evacuated the campus well before the national lockdown. While our students were heading back home, we began preparations to start teaching in the new normal. In 8 days, IFMR GSP was able to move all its classes to a fully online mode of teaching and learning. From March 2020 till now, we have worked hard to anticipate, manage, and adapt to all the changes that the pandemic has brought. With the full cooperation of the staff, students, and faculty, from early 2020 to now, we have delivered all our classes online, had 100% summer internships, 100% placement, and on-time graduation for 2 batches of our students. Today, we continue to offer the MBA, PhD, and EMBA degrees. We teach executives. In addition, now that we are part of Kriya, we work with the different centers and the SIAS school. So for example, with SIAS faculty, we have co-taught a marketing course in the GSB curriculum. We have also done a PhD course with a faculty member of a research center. And most exciting part of our development is that now, from this year on, there will be a business minor offered in SIAS that IFMR GSB faculty will be teaching. So some of you, if you choose to do a business minor, will be taught by my colleagues. So that's the story of IFMR GSB, how it has built resilience by initiating, anticipating, and dealing with change, including the COVID-19 pandemic. Now I want to turn to a few suggestions how you can build resilience to deal with unpredictable changes that are likely to happen. These are simple suggestions. They are not very academic in scope, and I give them with the best of intent in mind. The first one is read, don't glance. Headlines don't provide details. To know about something, you must read an entire article, if not several articles. Only then will you know enough to understand what is happening around you and to deal with it. Second piece of advice, listen more, talk less. There is a lot to learn by listening to those around you. Different viewpoints, new thoughts and ideas, surprising insights. These will provide you greater awareness of what may be heading your way and what kind of capabilities you have to develop. And finally, reflect, don't judge. Keep yourself open to new information, new views, and different kinds of people. This will give you the opportunity to change and be ready to change. The good news is that you will have the chance to do all the three things: to read, to listen, and to reflect as an incoming SIAS student. When you come to the residential campus of Sri City, in addition to your classes in arts and science and maybe business, you will be living amidst and interacting with 2 batches of SIAS seniors, 2 batches of MBA students, PhD students, and the staff and faculty who come on campus. On this 40-acre green and clean campus from where I'm speaking today, you will be able to prepare well for the unpredictable world that awaits. On behalf of all the students, staff, and faculty of the IFMR GSB School, my very best wishes to the SIAS class of 2024. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shobha Das, for that warm welcome to all our incoming students. We now invite Dr. Akila Narayan, Divisional Chair, Literature and Arts, to share her welcome address with the cohort of 2024. Dr. Akila Narayan is the Divisional Chair for Literature and Arts, the Associate Professor of Practice and Curator of VEMNI, the Idea Place at Kriya University. She's a writer, scholar, theatre actor, and rock Karnataka vocalist with a PhD in post-colonial studies from the Ohio State University. A key member of Chennai's global touring theatre company, Just Us Repertory, and the founding member of Performing Arts Institute, Sardhya Foundation, Dr. Narayan has toured with and acted with Just Us and acted in several plays which are recognized internationally, such as Night's End and Water Lilies, and has worked in several productions even with Sardhya Foundation. She received a national recognition for her theatre acting in 2013-14 as the awardee of the Sangeet Natak Academy Ustad Bismillah Khan Yuva Puraskar. We welcome you, Dr. Narayan.
Hi, thank you, Enika. A warm welcome to all of you from us at the School of Interwoven Arts and Sciences, from the IFMR Graduate School of Business, from the Kriya Centers, from students, faculty, staff, who have been waiting so eagerly to meet and get to know you. Dear students, I must confess it feels a little sad that all we can do is to look at each other through little squares, me smiling at you from mine, and you hopefully smiling right back from yours. Even through our smiles, we know these are unprecedented times. We are in the midst, we are told, of a once-in-a-century crisis. It sure feels like it. In the past year, we've been through so much together and alone as a planet and as a university. And yet here we are welcoming you with all our hearts into the Kriya fold, with joy and a sense of deep purpose. Because now is the time that the liberal arts and sciences mission, with which our mission of interwoven learning is deeply intertwined, is put truly to the test. And it is at this time that we must all come together to combine scientific temper with artistic zeal and philosophical preparedness, to think together irrespective of discipline and division, to tackle the rich, perplexing, and monumental questions of the 21st century with a deep sense of history, ethics, aesthetics, social justice, and inclusion. Just today, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published its 6th assessment report from the Physical Science Working Group. The projections are not a surprise. Global surface temperature increase, extreme weather events already the norm, will increase in frequency and intensity. Water will dry up. India, they say, will be severely affected. How are we to weather such change? We at SIAS believe that it is our responsibility to put minds, hearts, and bodies together, working in the sciences, social sciences, humanities, and the arts together, as researchers and teachers, as practitioners and professionals, as learners and dreamers and doers, as thinkers and advocates, to make the world a better place, whatever the odds, for not only humanity, but every species that inhabits the earth. I end with 2 poems by the great Wendell Berry, farmer and poet, about beginnings. The first one is called Be Still in Haste. How quietly I begin again. From this moment, looking at the clock, I start over. So much time has passed and is equaled by whatever split second is present. from this moment is the first. The second is called the wild geese. Geese appear high over us, pass, and the sky closes. Abandon, as in love or sleep, holds them to their way, clear in the ancient faith. What we need is here, and we pray not for new earth or heaven, but to be quiet in heart and in eye clear. What we need is here. What are we waiting for? From my little square to yours, I say, welcome, class of 2021-22. There's no time to waste. Let us begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akila, for your wonderful words. We hope to meet you and everyone else soon as well. We now come to the highlight of today's ceremony, our keynote address by Dr. Tara Tyagarajan. Dr. Tara Tyagarajan is a scientist and entrepreneur with an interest in understanding and enabling the productive evolution of the human mind and human systems. She holds a PhD in neuroscience from Stanford University, as well as a BA in mathematics from Brandeis University, and an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management. She was also a postdoctoral fellow at the National Institute of Health in the section on critical brain dynamics, and a visiting scientist at the National Center for Biological Sciences in India. Her work sits at a unique intersection of neuroscience, physics, and economics, focusing on how the environment influences human brain diversity and, in turn, cognitive and mental health outcomes. In 2016, she founded Sapien Labs, a unique research-based nonprofit organization with a mission to understand and enable the human mind. The primary initiative of Sapien Labs are the Human Brain Diversity Project and the Mental Health Million Project, global projects to understand the diversity of the human brain and mind. As an entrepreneur, she has founded and built several companies, including Madura Microfinance, a rapidly growing company that provides microloans in rural India. With over 300 branches and reach into over 25,000 villages, Madura provides over 2,000 crores in loans and annually, and pioneered a dark data framework and cutting-edge analytics to understand and predict individual economic outcomes. She has published numerous scientific research articles in various scientific journals and written on economic issues in India for the Economic Times, Business Line, Mint, and other publications. During her time in India in 2011, she was named the Indian Social Business Icon by Entrepreneur magazine and among 50 powerful women in India by Femina magazine. She presently lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband and 3 children. Dr. Tyagarajan, we welcome you.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I want to welcome all of you to Kriya and hope that you'll all soon be able to come to the wonderful Kriya campus that Mahesh just spoke to you about. So since we are doing this on Zoom, I'm going to start by sending you all a link to a poll in the chat, in the chat window. So this is only for the students, and it's just for me to get a little sense of who you guys are and why you're here. So please click the link and answer the question. Be honest, it's completely anonymous. So whatever you may have said during your admissions process, what I'm looking for is just what the most important reason that comes to mind when you first look at these options. Okay, so I'm putting, can I do this? Yeah, I can do this in the chat window. There we go. Okay, very quickly, just a couple of moments.
Dr. Tyagarajan, actually, you have to switch the two.
Oh, to panelists, I say, okay, I see what I see. Yeah. So panelists and attendees, there we go. Okay, very quickly, just few seconds. First thing that you see. Are you guys getting it? Did it come through? Oh, no. Okay. All right. Well, maybe this won't work. That's a pity. Oh, okay. It says it did. Okay, perfect. Perfect. Fabulous. Okay. So 90% of you said that you were here because you were interested in the interdisciplinary learning. So I think that's fantastic. And I think that, this says a lot about the kind of people that Kriya has brought on board this year. So as Mahesh and Akila and Shobha have all talked to you about, Kriya was started with the vision of building a new kind of academic institution with these few principles in mind, right? The first has been interwoven learning that you've heard about several times. And this is not just learning across disciplines, but breaking down the barriers between disciplines. A second one is porous boundaries. And what this means is the idea that, learning has to integrate with the real world, that learning should be relevant to the world. And the third, of course, is that you should learn to learn, because your education is not just these 4 years, it's lifelong. And this is just the beginning. So what does this mean and why does this matter? So I want to tell you a few stories from the past, because there's much to learn from history. Once you get a little distance from something, you can see it more objectively without all the noise of the time. And since I'm a scientist, these are stories about science. So you all know that we need oxygen to breathe and for combustion, to burn something. So in fact, the processes of burning and respiration, they all depend on the same thing. It's a reaction called oxidation. Now, just recently, during the second wave of COVID, having enough oxygen supply in India was a major challenge. So, but thank goodness, right? At least we knew what oxygen was and how to put it into tanks. Now, 250 years ago, this was not at all obvious. So first of all, the connection between the process of burning and respiration or breathing was not at all clear. Secondly, people used to think that there was something in every object or in everything called phlogiston. And when it was burning, it meant that phlogiston was escaping from it. So this was the theory of the time, right? And the leading scientists back then were convinced of this, even though no one knew what phlogiston was. And in their own words, they said, it's there, but you just can't catch it and put it in a bottle. Now, the fact that oxygen from outside was even involved at all was not understood. So it was not until the 1760s that a man by the name of Antoine de Lavoisier demonstrated that oxygen was required for combustion or burning and respiration, right? So in fact, he was the guy who named oxygen and hydrogen. He was also the guy who discovered that the law of conservation of mass, which I'm sure you've all studied in school. It's what says that in any reaction, whatever goes into it on one side has to come out on the other side in some way. It can't just vanish. Now, you guys might think, oh, this is all obvious. Everybody knows this. But in fact, this was not obvious at all. And, for 200,000 years of human history, it was only about 150 years ago that we figured this out. 250 years ago that we figured this out. Or we, as in, I would say, Antoine de Lavoisier figured this out. And so these are discoveries that have been, fundamental building blocks for even things like medical advances like oxygen tanks, which we take for granted now, used in hospitals, for building, efficient combustion engines, things like, your cars, your rocket propulsion, turbines used in industry. So rightfully, therefore, Antoine de Lavoisier is considered the father of modern chemistry. Okay, so here's a question. I'm going to give you all a quick quiz again, quick question. Let me find this link. All right, let's put this in here. All right, don't Google it. Just answer whatever you think first in your mind. Okay, well, so 30% picked chemistry, 30% literature, and you guys already knew where I was going with this, right? And 43% picked law. So yes, he studied law. And he studied law because his father was a successful lawyer and told him that he damn well better go do law because there's good money in this and prestige. But this was a guy who was curious. So he went to lectures in science, he got private tutors in subjects he was interested in, and so on. And he became a barrister, but he didn't practice, but nor did he become a professional scientist. His formal job was as a tax collector. So in those days, tax collection was privatized in France. And he in a sense that, so he could buy a share into a region, and he got a commission for the taxes collected in that region. So he managed the tax collection for a region, and that was his day job. But he used the income that he got from this job to set up his own personal laboratory. And the way, he really got into science was by entering a competition on ways to improve lighting in the streets, which he won. And remember, this was 100 years before light bulbs were invented. So he also tried a number of different things, right? He tried to design systems for city sanitation. He worked on ways to reduce air pollution from gunpowder. He was thought about, new ways to improve agriculture. I mean, he did all kinds of things. And among these, he did a number of chemistry experiments. Now, I tell you the story because he's an example of someone who's not constrained by the systems of the time. He was not constrained by the boundaries between disciplines. He looked at the world and he just went after whatever he felt was interesting and important. He was not waiting for someone to dictate his course of study, and nor was he deterred by people who said, hey, what right do you have to spout scientific theories when you're a lawyer or a tax collector? You're not a scientist. But he really exemplifies the possibilities, when you're able to break down barriers across disciplines. Because why was it him that was able to make such enormous advance in his lifetime relative to so many others? And it's, you see that if you don't look broadly at a problem with multiple perspectives, you're constrained in the possible solutions you can find. And you're even constrained in the questions you can ask. And the way you gain multiple perspectives is only by looking broadly and learning broadly across disciplines. So he's an example, of the extraordinary power of interwoven learning. Now, you might think, okay, this is one guy, but he's not an isolated case. If you look across history, you'll find that many of the greatest discoveries that substantially moved our thinking forward, and many of the greatest advances of mankind, are by people who've had broad exposure across disciplines and people who've not been constrained by a box which has been arbitrarily drawn by society. Now, I'll tell you one more story. So you've all heard of the term joule as a unit of energy. So this is named after someone called James Joule. So because he was the first person to show that heat could be turned into mechanical energy, and in fact, heat was nothing but motion. Now, this was in the 1800s, about 100 years after Lavoisier. But this was also a huge leap in thinking at the time, because people thought heat was something that came from somewhere and kind of moved through things. It was a separate thing. And he was the first to show that, in fact, this one form of energy can be converted into another. And that this was the precursor for this understanding of the law of conservation of energy, which is the first law of thermodynamics. And this is the foundation for building efficient machinery of all sorts, right? So from more efficient steam engines to, primarily one of the big things that came out of this is refrigeration. So, everyone in their home has Joule to thank in some way for the way we all live today. So how did he do this, right? So first of all, like Lavoisier, he was not a professional scientist. His family was in the brewing business, and they owned a brewery, which was sort of next. It was very successful, as the history says, and it was right next to the main prison in the town of Manchester in England. So in school, Joule was interested in science, but his father died when he was 15, and he had to go and take over the brewery. So actually, one of the reasons he was able to make such a huge leap forward in physics was because of brewing know-how, and also because he had access to all this beer making equipment and he was able to use it for his experiments. So in fact, when he discovered this mechanical equivalent of heat, he did this while he was trying to invent a more efficient way of brewing beer. So this is an example, not just of interwoven learning, but how having porous boundaries, the intersection of science with practical application, enables a big leap forward in scientific thinking. So some of you may be thinking, okay, these are all famous guys, the guys who've been dead for a long time. And what does this have to do with me? So, in India, a lot of people think about it as, school education is a means to an end. If I go there and I get the degree and I get my, I get good marks, then I, get a good placement. And a lot of times, we tend to think of it as a mean to an end and not part of the journey itself. But, consider that everything in our world has been built or created by somebody. Every path or trajectory is a product of the decisions we've made. So no matter what you do in life, you will make decisions that will impact or change something for someone. Maybe in the future in your own work, you will impact some aspect of a technology or a product or a law, where something becomes available, how easily it becomes available, how people think, whatever it is. And the ideas that you come up with, the opportunities you see, and the decisions you make will depend on the knowledge and perspective that you have. So, you guys are already pioneers. You've taken a chance on this new way of approaching education, and you will all play a very critical part in the realization of Kriya's vision. Every one of you has a role to play. So what I would ask of you is to approach your education in a way that's open-minded and questioning. So play an active role in your education, intentionally explore courses in different fields. And when you're doing so, ask yourself, why am I learning this? What relevance does it have to the world around me? And also importantly, what are the circumstances and history that brought this knowledge? And if it's, demand that you have these discussions in the class, discuss these with your classmates. And you all have today the amazing opportunity of the internet to, any question that pops in your mind, you can go out there and just find the answers pretty quickly. So take advantage of that. And, one way I think is helps bring perspective to the things you learn is, imagine something you wish the world would have in the future, or the way you wish the world would be in the future. Or, take something that's been built or created or invented that you admire and think about what would it have taken to do that? What would those people have needed to know? Or what would you need to understand? So if you approach your education through that lens, then what you learn can become far more meaningful, because it's not just the knowledge and the skills that matter. It's also the perspective that you gain around those knowledge and skills. Because, our minds don't operate in a vacuum. Whatever your mind can create, it really depends on the inputs that it gets. So the possibilities that you will have, what your mind can come up with, will depend on the exposure and experience you have, because those are the possibilities you can see. If you've never been exposed to something, you will never know the challenges in that arena, nor will you be able to identify the opportunities. And the more you know, the more opportunities you will start to see. So now I want to say one more thing. So even as we all start out with great hopes for ourselves, and we should always start out that way, it's important to realize that, life is not without obstacles, and it's not a straight line. And I think, often we all think of life as some kind of upward progression, that we'll do this first, we'll do this next, and then maybe, you get a job, you keep moving up and so on. But, life throws a lot of things at us. And I think perhaps, all of you are more acutely aware of this because of the pandemic. Maybe some of you lost a family member to COVID. Maybe you have someone who, worked at a company that had to shut down because of COVID. There are many things beyond that are not within our control. But what is in our control is how we respond to these kinds of obstacles, right? What do we do? Who would have thought that a class would be starting its academic year at college on Zoom? What's the path forward for education in a pandemic-ridden world? And, what are the new ways we can find new solutions? I mean, we have to find new ways. So, the most important things in life often don't come without some struggle. So life itself doesn't come without struggle, and not all valiant efforts succeed. So I want to tell you one more story. We're all here on Zoom. It seems like a normal thing now. We've all been doing this day and night for the last year and a bit. And especially for your generation, that was born into an internet-based world where you all take digital communication for granted, right? I'm sitting here in the United States, you guys are all in India, and our words are transmitting across the ocean, most likely through undersea cables, which carry most of internet traffic. So I'm going to tell you a story about these internet cables, how they came to be. So, once the principles that you could communicate across wires was established, there was a British guy called Frederick Gisborne who had invented a way to put cables under the water without them getting damaged. So this was about 160 years ago, right? So one day, this guy Gisborne, he happened to meet an American guy called Cyrus Field, who was a wholesaler of paper. So they started chatting, and Gisborne told him about some small underwater projects that he was trying to do. So Cyrus was moderately financially successful, and he was getting quite bored of the paper business. So he didn't know anything whatsoever across this kind of telecom technology, or in those days, telegraphy. But as someone who traded paper across continents, he thought this was really interesting to be able to communicate quickly. So, he invested and got involved with Gisborne on a small project. And then he got much more ambitious. Like, he became captivated with this idea that what if you could communicate across the ocean? Nearly instantly, from the US to the United Kingdom, to England. So he thought, my God, this could completely change the possibilities of the world. So he formed a company to lay a cable across the Atlantic Ocean. And he went about trying to get money to do this. Now, everyone thought he was absolutely mad. So here's a poem I'm going to read to you that sums up the public attitude of the time, right? So it says, "Come, listen all unto my song. It's no silly fable. 'Tis all about the mighty cord they call the Atlantic cable. Bold Cyrus Field," he said, says he, "I have a pretty notion that I can run a telegraph across the Atlantic Ocean." Then all the people laughed and said they'd like to see him do it. He might get half seas over, but he never could go through it. To carry out his foolish plan, he never would be able. He might as well go hang himself with his Atlantic cable. So, this was, 7,000 kilometers across the ocean. It was a massive undertaking. It actually took him almost 12 years, but he somehow managed to convince both the British and the US government to invest in this idea. So finally, after all of this effort, in 1857, they constructed the cable, and they were standing on the shores of Ireland to send off this massive ship, which had to pull the cable. So two ships were going to come from different directions and join up in the middle. And it was this, big production, dragging this huge, heavy, long cable. So at the send-off ceremony, Cyrus Field spoke very emotionally. He said, "I have no words to express the feelings which fill my heart tonight. It beats with love and affection for every man, woman, and child who hears me. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." And they sent the ship off with great hope. And unfortunately, just 300 kilometers in, the cable snapped and the ship had to come back again. So now they took several months to fix the cable. And then they sent it out again. Again, in the second attempt, there was a huge storm. And just 150 kilometers in, it broke again. Now, by this time, 12 months had gone by. Finally, they were on their third try. This time, without a lot of fanfare, Field was feeling a lot of pressure. So here's what he said. He said, when I thought of all that we had passed through, of all the hopes thus far disappointed, of the friends saddened by our reverses, I felt a load at my heart almost too heavy to bear. But my confidence is firm and my determination is fixed. So this third time, they had learned a lot from these last few attempts. And so, they fixed a lot of the problems, and this time it succeeded, right? And Cyrus sent the first message, which said, "Glory to God in the highest, on earth, peace and goodwill to all men." And then the American President Buchanan sent a message to Queen Victoria. He said, "It is a triumph more glorious because far more useful to mankind than was ever won by conqueror on the field of battle. May the Atlantic Telegraph, under the blessing of heaven, prove to be a bond of perpetual peace and friendship between the kindred nations, and an instrument destined by divine providence to diffuse religion, civilization, liberty, and law throughout the world." It was like a miracle. Imagine this. Until then, The only way to send a message across the ocean was by ship, and it took weeks, and the world absolutely erupted into celebration across continents. In New York, they had such a huge celebration with so many fireworks that the city hall caught fire and almost burned down. And people were so inspired that they wrote poetry about it. So I'm going to read you a couple of these poems and the kind of hopes that this feat created. So this is by a poet called John Rollin Ridge. He says, "Let earth be glad, for the great work is done, which makes at last the old and new world one. Let all mankind rejoice, for time nor space shall check the progress of the human race. Though nature heaved the continents apart, she cast in one great mold the human heart. She framed on one great plan the human mind, and gave man speech to link him to his kind." And here is another one, and I apologize, I don't have the name of the poet, but it goes, "Stretch on, thou wonder-working wire, stretch north, south, east, and west, deep down beneath the surging sea, high over the mountain's crest. Stretch onwards without stop or stay, all lands and oceans span, knitting with firmer, closer bonds, man to his brother man." Now, you might think this is the end of the story, and it's a great story, but it's not. 3 weeks after all of these jubilant celebrations, the cable broke. Cyrus Field went from being glorified to being vilified. They launched an investigation. They accused him of mismanaging money and of being negligent and so on and so forth. And at this point, civil war was breaking out in the US, and people didn't have the appetite for these grand projects anymore. And yet somehow Cyrus Field carried on, right? It took him another 7 years again to raise the money. And in 1866, he did it again. He laid another cable. And this time it stood, and it changed forever the possibility of transcontinental human communication. So today, there are 380 undersea cables that span 1.2 million kilometers, carrying most of the transcontinental internet traffic, including probably everything I'm saying to you right now. So here we are, at this inauguration. This is an event that sits almost unknowingly on top of a mountain of struggle of people before us. So what I want to say to you is, never should we take anything in the world for granted, because if people had made different choices, it could well be different. Every person's decisions, everything that we do changes the course of life. So I want to end by saying that I wish you all a very, very exciting time at CREA, one that expands your understanding of the world and of yourself, and gives you the tools to construct a vision for yourself and for your life. But most of all, what I hope is that it equips you with an understanding that helps you navigate what the world throws at you. You can't ever predict outcomes, but I hope that you will all explore widely while you're here and then go on to do very bold things. So I want to leave you with a quote by Louis Pasteur. And for those of you who don't know him, he's a scientist who, really discovered a lot of, brought our understanding of microbes, and really to whom we have to thank for the whole concept of vaccinations, which is extremely important today. And that is this, that chance favors the prepared mind. So thank you all, and I will end there.
Thank you, Dr. Tyagarajan. These inspiring stories and poems have certainly given us something to take back. They correlate with the vision we have at CREA itself. We'll never be constrained by the box drawn for us by society. And this has given us the motivation we all need to explore every facet that interests us. We now come to an end of the formal orientation inauguration ceremony and the beginning of an incredible journey with each of you at CREA. Here's a short video to take you through the week that awaits.